let's speak to our own little star. Let's bring him to the show now. He's our little star in the sky. He's our Pallades, isn't he, Chewie? He's Craig Renney. Kia ora, Craig.
Nice. It's Craig.
I've been called many things, but Pallades is not one of them. So I'll take that. Thank you.
You taught me a new phrase this afternoon, Craig, and I'm just trying to find the image that someone sent me. Here it is. This is what you taught me today. The dead cat bounce. You heard that before, Chewie? The dead cat bounce? A
No.
short-lived and often sharp rally that occurs within a secular downtrend. You drop a cat from a high distance, it goes down, 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 and then it bounces, and then it keeps going down. And Craig, you described to me on your live stream today that we're experiencing a bit of a dead cat bounce with these GDP numbers. Tell us about it, sir.
Sure. So today, StatCenter put out its GDP numbers. The Reserve Bank was expecting GDP to grow by 0.4%, as was the Treasury. The private banks had all penciled in 0.7%. StatCenter came out and we had 0.8% quarterly growth, which is good news. It's good. We should welcome GDP growth whenever we get it, right?
Yep.
But on an annual basis, we saw the economy fall by 1.1%. So the 4 months.
Annual means the last 12, inclusive 12
Correct.
months. Is that what you're saying? Yeah, okay.
Yep. So quarterly, the last 3 months, annual, the last 12 months. When we look at the last 12 months against the 12 months before that, the economy declined, was 1.1% smaller. And if we look at the past 2 years of GDP growth, we've grown by essentially 0.334% across those 2 years. So that's equivalent to zero in terms of actual growth. So what's happened in 2024, we saw an economy basically fall off the cliff. Right. We saw the steepest fall in GDP since 1991. We saw the steepest fall in government consumption since 1991. These two things might be related.
Right.
We also know who was the Minister of Finance in 1991, who was recently revisiting our TV screens as if we needed reminding.
Yeah, gosh.
So we said, okay, so what's happened is that dead cat bounce is we've bounced because we fell so quickly, we've come up a little bit. Because as we say in economics, it's called a dead cat bounce because even a dead cat bounces. So when an economy is flat and dead, it comes back up even a little bit. You see that correction. And so we saw a bit of growth, but that growth wasn't particularly widespread. We saw it essentially in a few areas. We have 16 sectors of the economy. And on an annual basis, there were still declines in 11 of those 16 sectors, including goods producing, so all of the manufacturing industries, and the service sectors overall declined. The only one that grew was primary sector overall, and that was primary sector contains two parts, essentially agriculture, dairy, horticulture was one group, and then mining. Mining fell a lot, but the only thing holding the economy up is essentially dairy and horticulture. Now, what that means is we've only got one engine of growth currently. We're currently flying the aeroplane on one engine right now, which is whether or not butter prices remain where they are.
So does that mean if we're only flying on one engine right now, does that actually mean like turbulent times ahead? Like if we got halfway across the Tasman and we lost an engine, but we could still fly, but it should be a pretty rough flight after that.
Well, one of the things we could do is actually turn some of the other engines on because we've deliberately turned them off.
Okay.
That's the key challenge. It's not as if we've voluntarily turned them off. And so, in order to get there more efficiently, well, of course, what happens is you get there more slowly and the plane moves about a lot more. So what we've done is we've said, okay, we're going to turn off government investment, which we've seen with all sorts of things, from ferries to government expenditure to a range of other areas, science, R&D, innovation. We've decided that all of those things are just a little bit too unnecessary right now. Those are the engines we've turned off. And because some of the other engines of growth, so historically in New Zealand, we've grown GDP on the back of house prices, housing investment, and population growth.
Right.
Population growth isn't growing in the way that it was in the past. In fact, we're now losing a New Zealand citizen every 7.5 minutes permanently. They go overseas. So we're losing the engine of growth that is migration. It's at historic lows. We're losing the ability to grow the economy because we're seeing construction fall quite so quickly. Construction was down 9% from a year ago, and there are approximately 10% less value of output in terms of the actual amount of construction work being undertaken right now. So that's a problem. When we look at GDP per capita, because we're Kiwis, we like to always look at things on a per capita basis. GDP per capita is lower now, $52,872, than it was in March 2022.
Okay.
So the economy hasn't grown on a per capita basis for 3 years. And when we look at the overall, when we look at where we see growth happening much more quickly in what we call gross operating surplus, which is a broad measure of profit. That grew much more quickly than workers' compensation. And in fact, in the last quarter, in the December quarter, we revised worker compensation, which is just wages, that actually fell by 0.2%. So the economy is not growing. Big bits of the economy aren't working. And where we are seeing growth, we're seeing growth in areas that it's very hard to keep growing. It's very hard to get more out of agriculture. And we're not seeing growth in wages, which would allow the rest of the economy to start again.
So as an economist looking at what's happening right now, I mean, as a dullard, which is my official title, I kind of go, well, you're saying there's some good and there's some bad. What do we need to do? Like, what does this government need to do? I'm not even going to say to turn it around, but to continue this fairly good result that we've just had for this quarter. What needs to happen? Where are the concerns for what's to come from you?
So many people like to think about economics as essentially just mathematics, right? It's a bunch of statistics, right? Economics is really psychology, right? Economics is a confidence game. And growing the economy is a confidence game. People need to feel confident to go out and spend money, to go out and invest, to go out and do things. Yeah? And we're taking the confidence away. Unemployment is rising. The number of filled jobs are falling. 48% of Kiwis got a pay rise less than inflation last year. As a consequence, nobody's going out and doing anything. Now, 250 years of economic history tells us at this point what the Crown should be doing is investing. There are 15,000 fewer people working in construction than this time last year. What that means is that there's never been a better time to build something in this country. And we're desperately short of things like, ferry terminals, things like schools, things like an enormous hospital on the South Island in possibly one of the largest towns, right? Instead, we're rowing back on all of that, and we're not seeing that sort of investment. And that's the sort of investment that would give local economies, local workers more confidence. You would see more people in the shops, and you would get that virtuous cycle of growth starting again.
You've brought our attention to, just so people know, credit goes to you, the Ipsos poll. Is that where we're seeing also, when you're talking about confidence, you're seeing it in here? So the top issues for New Zealanders, according to this, are inflation, cost of living, healthcare, hospitals, the economy, crime, law and order, violence, antisocial behaviour, housing, price of housing. And it seems to me that this research, maybe for the first time for a while, is showing that the Labour Party is more capable in the eyes of the respondents than the National Party to most of those top 5 issues. I mean, inflation, Labour. Healthcare, hospitals, Labour. The economy, National. housing, price of housing, labour. So according to this, 3 out of the top 4 issues at the moment, the citizens, us, people of New Zealand are saying we trust Labour more. Is this some of the things you're talking about when you talk to trust?
Yeah, exactly. What you're seeing here is essentially a loss of trust in the current government to actually tackle many of the problems that Kiwis see and feel on a daily basis. We see when we look at the performance of government in terms of they measure that on a scale of 1 to 10, and as you can see, it's 4.3%. When Labour lost office, it was 5.2%.
Wow.
Right. Back
Okay.
when Jacinda Ardern was re-elected in 2020, it was 7.3.
Right.
So you can see that there's been a really steep fall away in the belief that that in particular this government has the solutions to the issues that people see and feel. And if we go beyond those top 5 into the top 20, which I think is a couple of slides down, Pat, what you can see, if you keep going down,
Top 5 issues, noteworthy issues.
So slide
Top issue.
15, it's page 15, Chief.
Stress. You even know the page numbers. You're such a nerd.
There you go. So political party most capable of managing other issues. And what you can see is the National Party, with the exception of the last one, which is defence, is completely absent.
Wow. If it was like this time next year, it would be a one-term government, wouldn't it? If this was because how would anyone, like at the moment, Christopher Hipkins is preferred prime minister, and the public seem to be saying, well, there was 3 things in the top 5, or 2 things in the top 5. So basically that's saying 3 things in the top 20 they trust National with, and the rest is the left bloc.
Well, that's certainly one interpretation of it. What you can see is that the lead on both sides for many of these things is very narrow again, and it's just like the polls we see elsewhere, that the lead could go one way or the other depending upon the day. But as I think it's David Axelrod, the former pollster for Bill Clinton, said, the trend is your friend.
Yeah,
it's what the trend is saying over time, which is important. Which is actually that the people trust this government less to do stuff, trust this government less to deal with the issues that they see that they've got to face, and actually, they're open to the opposition having a go. The phone's back on the hook in terms of whether or not voters want to hear an alternative.
This looks like a very in-depth analysis of this research. Is this the kind of stuff that you have to read sitting down, Craig? Just wondering.
Yes. I love this stuff. So, because what we also get, is studies by hospitals and by cost of living. But again, it all just tells us this story that the current government's framing that it took at the election, that it was going to get the economy back on track.
Yeah.
That it had a laser-like focus on the cost of living. We saw food prices last year rise by 4.5%. We saw cheese prices last year rise by 17%. Beef prices rose 20%. Lamb prices were 20%. People's ability to go shopping on a daily basis is still as hard as it was a couple of years ago.
I'm gonna delve into this. I like some numbers, maybe not quite as much as you, Craig. But the thing that jumps out at me straight away when you said that when Jacinda left, she was at 5.2, and we hear from a segment of this country, and we talked about this the last few nights, that she's supposedly the most divisive, most hated woman in New Zealand, and it says to me that since she left, including Christopher Hipkins, no leader, no prime minister has been able to get to her rating, even though she's supposed to be the worst of the worst. It just echoes once again how unfortunate this country is that a small group of very loud tinfoil hat wearers removed this beautiful leader from our country.
What we also do, if you go right to the very start of that chart, you can see that the that one, the rating of government performance over the 6 months.
Yep.
If you go right at the start of that chart, you can see when Bill English was chucked out of office. And Bill English was chucked out of office on a 5.4% measure in terms of rating of government performance.
Madness. Hey, Chewie, I know you're sitting there listening and you're mulling over in your tutastic ways. Anything you want to throw at Craig before we let him go?
Look, anytime you throw a graph like that at me, that is just a something that would have something screaming in a cockpit going whoop whoop, terrain, pull up, whoop whoop. Look, I cackle. Is this part of a story that is going to continue to the election? Or do you think that there is somehow something that National can do to turn it around in that important sort of next year run up to the election to make us all forget about it and make us think that they're good economic managers?
Now, I come from the UK, right? If we had polling in the 80s and the 90s that told us every election Margaret Thatcher or the Conservative government was about to be chucked out of office. And then we got to the election and lo and behold, they won again and again and again. So we've always got to be careful looking at these things. But what I would say is that this polling and this data and the polling we've seen from the past opinion polls seem to indicate that the country's open to the conversation, that there's an opportunity, that if the progressive parties, Labour Party, Green Party, Party Māori, want and have the policies to exploit that opportunity, there are voters who want to hear that story.
Yeah, it's very true. Greg.
That to me is the thing that I would take away from all of this data. The phones, occasionally you can have the best policy in the world and it doesn't matter because no one's listening, right? This data tells us that people are ready to listen again. And so there is a window where political parties of the left can talk to the public about an alternative is not only possible, it's preferable, and you'd be better off. And if we can get that right, then it's very much a story of this could be a one-term government, because voters would have buyer's remorse and they can look at what they've seen today and the stories they've been told and vote accordingly that they don't think the country's back on track.
So I don't think I'm ever going to predict another election for the rest of my life, Craig. After the last two or three, honestly, I just won't do it. I honestly, I'm just saying I won't come out and say who I think is going to win. Hey, there's a couple of questions in the chat. Have you got time for just a couple of those, and then we'll say goodnight?
Of course.
I had them before. There's that one. Happy birthday, Chewie. Had some of my grass money.
Oh, thank you.
I don't know if that's specifically for you, Craig. Obviously not, but there it is. Here's another one for you, Craig. Kiwi Bird says you've inspired Kiwi Bird to study economics.
Sorry about that, Kiwi Bird.
Yeah. I'm going to say, sheesh. Is there a measure of how much money is siphoned overseas in profits? Banks, power, groceries, BlackRock, big overseas owned farms, forestry, etc. Because it feels like so much of our production is just sent overseas. Interesting question.
It's a really interesting question. We don't have it across the board because we also have people who will own shares who are overseas residents, but in New Zealand firms. So it looks like that profit's in New Zealand, but then the dividend heads straight overseas and we don't see it. Also, some firms are held in trust. Some firms siphon their profits out of the country as costs. So they'll have a company in a tax haven which is charging them for branding. And as a consequence, that money then heads overseas because they've got to pay $200 million in branding, which is identical to the size of their profits, which means that in New Zealand, they didn't make a profit. But in the country where they don't pay any tax, they suddenly make large profits. So it's very hard to do that. What we can say is, for example, is if we look at the big banks, for example, the largest banks, the big four banks, they're making $8-9 billion a year in profit. Almost all of that money is heading straight overseas.
And can we tell the people what you told me the other day? Because I like this idea of taxing profits going offshore. But when I said that to you, you said,
I can't remember, Pat. You've got me entirely lost there.
Sorry, I thought it was a really easy setup. You
No.
said that we have free trade agreements that would
Oh, sorry. We absolutely do.
contravene.
We have free trade agreements with Australia. We have free trade agreements with Singapore. It would also be very hard to do that with what you may call digital services companies, which don't have a physical footprint in a particular country. And if you decided that you want to just tax that profit overseas, what you would see is that essentially investment then not coming into New Zealand, or being charged more, so that those companies would again work out a way so that they're never having to pay a tax in New Zealand rather than paying it somewhere else. We have a pretentious phrase for this in economics. We call it tax arbitrage, which essentially is where you've got one jurisdiction that has a lower tax rate than another, and all of the profits end up in the lower tax jurisdiction rate rather than in the higher tax jurisdiction rate.
All right. What are you doing for Matariki, Craig? Anything?
Fixing a laundry. That's
Nice.
the highlight of the glamour of my weekend. Looking after my son, who's been desperate to see the Matariki cluster. Although unfortunately the Wellington weather has been terrible to date, and apart from that, just relaxing.
Thank you for joining us. Appreciate the extra work you put in today with that little live stream we did straight after GDP. People have very much enjoyed that. And do you know what you're doing next week in Locked Out yet? Do you want to give it a teaser, or are we still working that out?
I'm still working it out, but one of the things I'm really keen to look at, and obviously, always keen to have viewers and listeners' feedback if there's something they want us to look at. Really keen to do that. But doing a lot of investigating on the Māori economy right now, the size of the Māori economy, what it's been doing. It seems appropriate given Matariki, but also given the opportunity at the next election for a bigger, better Māori economy in the future, and some government policies that seem to be pushing us in the wrong direction.
And of course, I passed that on, didn't you? That some of our viewers were quite keen to get you to talk to Ruth Richardson. We're going to try and make that happen. Hopefully.
Extremely keen to do that.
Hopefully. All right, Craig. Have a good long weekend. Thanks for your time again and for all your hard work. Appreciate you.
Thank you.